Welcome to Winterset in Summer 2020, an online conversation to connect writers with readers like you. We're deeply grateful to our sponsors and donors, without whose support we could not bring you our festival. We can't be together at the beaches on the beautiful Eastport Peninsula this year, but we hope to welcome you in person in August 2021 for our 20th annual festival. Until then, sit back and enjoy the show wherever you happen to be.
Welcome everybody to Winterset in Summer Literary Festival. Obviously this is our digital edition because of the COVID. But I'm here, Noreen Golfman, member of the board, happily hosting so many of the great writers that we have for this special edition that we put together for all the people who always come to Winterset and all of those who are new and want to hear and listen to the spectacular artists that we've programmed for you. So I'm really happy today to introduce current rock star in the Canadian firmament, somebody I guess most of you have probably read, and those of you who haven't will be teased into wanting to read this novel and other works by Gail Coles. We're going to be talking in a moment about her spectacular novel and all of the attention it's garnered, fresh on the heels of or in the wake of lots of conversation about it because of course it was shortlisted for Canada Reads. So onward with this show, and we're going to hear now a reading from Gail Coles.
Hi, I am about to read from my debut novel, Small Game Hunting at the Local Coward Gun Club. The novel is separated into 3 different sections: prep, lunch, and dinner, and I am about to read from lunch. Iris sighs and tries hard to remember the moment she last felt just happiness. Her whole life has been tinged with low-lying sorrow. She has never been able to count on just one side of a feeling, but this is the worst hand she has ever been dealt. There have been other unplayable hands: her father's alcoholism, her mother's depression, his leaving, her crying. Each time Iris thought, this is the worst. No, this. Abandoning Olive, bad. Financial ruin, worse. Drug addict ex-boyfriend, worse than that. Eating disorders, homelessness, violence, bad, badder, baddest. But no, Iris was just being readied. Life was a rigorous training period, and then so swift and accidental, like a poisoning. Ba-bam. John. Most days Iris feels like the cat her cousins found in the brook. A black stray so eager for affection, not feral at all, even for her obvious abandonment. Everyone in the cove struck by its congenial nature. Her cousins took turns picking it up, passing it around, marveling at the volume of its purring. And then they threw it off the wharf to see if it could swim, to test its endurance. And that half-starved, already wounded cat swam ashore. All were in awe. A magical cat. How clever. Some cat. They ruminated on the amazing puss and praised its perseverance in the face of such struggle. They rubbed its ears. They held it close inside their coats, its warm heart beating against them. Poor puss, believing it had finally proven itself worthy of affection, convinced of its safety the whole way out the wharf, right up until the moment it was once again flung, airbound, flying as cats do, with its paws outstretched, preparing to land in the cold cove water. Nevertheless, each time the cat would return for a caress, wet and warm, puss believing that this would soon be over, someone would intervene. And each time Iris's cousins hove it away and waited in amazement, speculating on the quality of cat, what fine kittens their indestructible cat would breed. Later, having learned her lesson too late, poor puss struggled to escape them before being soothed. Here, kitty, kitty, sweet kitty, lovable kitty, pretty kitty, a favorite kitty. And though the cat understood none of it, she warmed to their voices as she wanted nothing more than for someone to care for her now that she was too hurt to care for herself. Not to feed her, she was a mouser. Not to shelter her, she would find a place, but to care for her, press a face into her fine fur and say she was a good cat. But this never happened. Those boys threw puss off the wharf until she didn't swim back. And most days, Iris feels like a drowning cat.
Great reading.
Thank you.
I love that cat story. It's almost a fable within the novel. It's about the novel. It's about the characters of the novel. We'll come back to that. I just want to say first, congratulations on, first of all, being the BMO Winterset Award winner for 2019. Absolutely wonderful. This is your second BMO prize. So you've joined a very rarefied air where only a few people, I think, are living of multiple winners of the BMO prize.
Joan has two.
Yes, as I say, it's quite a special place.
Oh.
So good for you, girl. That's really excellent. And as I mentioned earlier, just coming off weeks, I guess, of conversation on CBC about this wonderful novel as a Canada Reads finalist. So I'm curious about what that experience was like for you, being an observer of your own work. I mean, so much attention to it, right? What a wonderful thing. But what was that like for you?
It was as I expected, ultimately. Like, I knew that the novel was going to be problematic for certain people on the Defender panel, and it proved to be such. I should say that I didn't actually watch or listen to the live tapings or recordings of the debates because I don't know that that's something that I would personally benefit from. And I also thought it was important to let my defender feel like she had ownership of the show, and in that way I wasn't weighing in with my 2 cents on how she was doing. I was just trying to be supportive from the sidelines and give her space to do her thing, which I thought she really excelled at. I think the novel makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And so there was a lot of conversation around that discomfort, but I also think that's the point. That's actually by design. Like, I'm not trying to placate to a broad readership with this book. I wrote a book for a group of marginalized people struggling in Newfoundland and Labrador, and so I assume that people, unfortunately, who don't see themselves reflected in that narrative are going to be annoyed, especially if they've seen themselves reflected in narrative since the beginning of time.
Yeah, but paradoxically, I guess, because it was a Canada Reads finalist and a BMO winner, the readership has had to have expanded because people would be really curious about the novel anyway. You get so much exposure, so that even if, you know, it's all context of difficult read and all of that, you're really reaching much further because of this attention, which is great.
I mean, I think even though it's set in a very specific, very regional area, the book speaks to all people who felt marginalized, who felt silenced or exploited. And unfortunately, that's most of Canadians. Like, there are very few people who have routine and regular access to power in our country. And so most of the reading public and people who likely have never read a book before will accidentally tune in to Canada Reads or interviews where I'm talking about things that happen in small game hunting, and they will be able to relate to what the characters are experiencing, regardless of whether they've been to Newfoundland or been to a restaurant in St. John's. Ever they've been to a restaurant somewhere. They've been in situations where people were without privilege and unable to access resources, and that's ultimately what the book is about.
Well, a restaurant's such a wonderful setting for that. A lot of film has taken advantage of that because it's such a visual opportunity, preparing the food and all that, but I can't think of too much in literature that actually locates the restaurant as this sort of microcosm of social class and labor exploitation and the dynamics of power, and of course all the intrigue that happens in a small confined workplace where people's lives are stepping over each other and all of that. So it's a terrific choice, especially a high-end restaurant. And you're looking at it from the other side.
We still call it the service industry.
Yeah.
And all the connotations that go along with this idea of being in service are still very present in the restaurant industry. Mm-hmm. Anytime you have a group of young, easily exploitable individuals ununionized in a space, there are going to be situations where people are mistreated. And that, unfortunately, is the case for all industries across the globe, regardless of whether they're housed in some building or trying to maintain some facade of progressiveness or wokeness or what have you. When there are no protections in place, people are harmed. And so the restaurant is just an example where we're even more blatant than in other institutions where this still goes on, where classism and misogyny and racism are still very present. We know that that's the case in Canada. We know that it's the case across most of the world, unfortunately. But at the restaurant, you're still like greeted at the door by the beautiful hostess. Like, we're not even pretending to have come along with the rest of, you know, humanity inside the restaurant.
The passage you read that I said to me, it sort of encapsulates a lot about the behavior and the dynamics of people in the novel, the false hope, I suppose, to some extent, the path dependencies, the patterns of struggle that end unfruitfully, all of that, and of course this vulnerable creature who's trying to swim to shore, and then cheered on for, you know, it just all underscores to some degree the trap of, I guess, futility, of trying to get out of a certain situation. And yet, there's nothing to do except repeat the same behavior and the same pattern. And that's what a lot of the characters, of course, if not all of the characters, are doing from all of the classes that you describe here, but particularly for the people who are most conspicuously vulnerable and exploited. And I suppose that's where some of the negative reactions come, or not negative, but some of the discomfort readers have, right? The expectation is that the novel is going to get you out of that. It's going to find a path for those vulnerable people to escape and transcend it. And that choice is quite deliberate, obviously, on your part, not to offer a false escape hatch.
I mean, listen, the novel is very unapologetic in demanding change. And I'm very unapologetic in demanding change. Because it's only by some fluke of circumstance that I'm here having this conversation with you right now. Like a person of my lived experience, my heritage and my background have potentially very few opportunities to have these kinds of conversations and meet with the general public about how people have been oppressed in Newfoundland and Labrador and throughout the country, more now than ever, but still not nearly enough. And so the opportunity to show how it begins, how the socialization of unaccountability begins with children, begins with boys, specifically when we're talking about a culture of misogyny, where we let them disrespect human and beast. Like, these things are not divisible. Like, if you are disrespectful to an animal, then you are disrespectful to yourself, because you yourself are an animal. Like, I don't compartmentalize. Like, I think all of these things are related and relational. Like, capitalism, colonialism, and misogyny are a tightly woven braid. They're indestructible. And I think, to some degree, I want us to acknowledge that there is no one thing that is holding people down. It is all these things, all these systems working concurrently that makes the cat unable to reach the shore, that makes Iris and Olive constantly vulnerable to every situation and every circumstance. And I do not turn away from that, because I know there are lots of young women and marginalized people in Newfoundland and Labrador that are really struggling right now to see a future for themselves in our province. And the government or the leadership in Newfoundland and Labrador does not think that they're meaningful contributors to society. And that is just wrong, and it is violent, and the only way we're ever going to get a better society or to enact any kind of change is to acknowledge that we need change, right? That's, I think, the role of arts and culture professionals in our communities.
The tag that somebody's given you, I don't know whether it's the Canada Reads crowd or what, that this is, maybe it's your publisher, that this is goth novel or something like that, puts it in a category of a kind of genre. It gives it generic qualities that seem to me might distract from what you're talking about, where you want people to really be inside this novel in a way that's challenging and maybe uncomfortable, but illuminating and to some degree revelatory, right? And do you think that that tag goth is useful, or you don't worry about that kind of thing?
No, I actually, because everything about my art practice is really important to me, I'm consulted on every aspect of it. So there's nothing that has my name on it that I haven't considered. And so a lot of these things, like the tag, like the multiple warnings, the description, even the cover copy, is an attempt to prepare the reader for what is about to happen inside the pages of this novel. And so that in and of itself is me requesting consent from the reader. I want them to know that there are going to be very difficult passages in the book. And this is not, I'm not coercing anyone into reading the novel by presenting it as something that it isn't. Sure. Which I think, unfortunately, is really prevalent, not just in the publishing industry, but in all industries. We present things in a way that is totally false.
Well, it's bait.
It's bait. Half of the food in the grocery store is not food, right? Half of the things that we think are self-care are not careful at all. And so I want to be honest. I'm attempting to be as honest as one can be in fiction, and I'd be doing a discredit to myself and to my readers if I pretended that the book was something that it wasn't in order to lure them into it. I don't want their $22.50. I don't even get there 2250. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want
if you did, that would be very awesome.
I would be in much better financial shape, but I don't want anyone to feel like they have been baited or entrapped.
Sure.
The book is about consent, is about like establishing trustful relationships.
So you're okay with goth?
And like all the warnings and all of the very careful consideration that reviewers have given the book, so that people feel like they know what they're getting into. Like, I know where everyone puts the book down. I know where that happened.
Yeah.
I wrote it.
Yeah.
I had to step away from the computer myself.
I bet.
And so I want everyone to find a way through it so that it does no harm, no further harm. It's about like finding a route to recovery, not doing further damage.
Well, you swam to shore, I guess, a few times, right? And here you are.
Yeah.
So how do you account, since you've characterized your own experience as being similar, you understand the places and the world, the environment that these characters have come from? How do you explain, obviously talent, will, is it persistence, and how is it we're here on the grounds of Government House in St. John's, Newfoundland in 2020? How does that happen to a Megan Gail Coles?
I think I grew up a child of the 80s in an area that had just found itself, but for a brief moment, the Great Northern Peninsula had found itself. So this was like post-Rhodes, pre-COD moratorium. And so because of that, I benefited from an education system that had many of the same resources as an urban or more densely populated education system. This no longer exists where I'm from. But when I was in elementary school and in high school, we had sandboxes and paint and art classes and access to books. There wasn't a library in my community, but there was a library in my school. And that access to literature allowed me to like cultivate this desire to learn about the world. And so that's like a foundational kind of idea. But there's also this notion or something even more innate in that I think Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are natural born storytellers. I would argue that everyone has a story to tell. And in my giant bay family, regardless of whether or not I'd been talking all day, they still allowed me to continue talking. And that amount of agency cultivates confidence in a person. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that I have a very strong support system, in that I have these really remarkable female friends that are there to help me rebuild myself every single time the world tears me apart. And unfortunately, this has happened more than once. And we often prioritize romantic love between some kind of like sexual partner. We prioritize that as what you're striving for. And I'm not suggesting that that kind of romantic love is not important, because it is. What I'm suggesting is that there's this other kind of friendship love that can be even more monumental and foundational in how it impacts our ability to move through life's challenges. Like, I could not have done it without the women in my life who held me up when I didn't know if I could stand.
Well, this is certainly a very strong argument against adultery, at the very least. And this should be like a primer for any woman who's thinking about getting involved with somebody who's married. But that's perhaps too obvious.
I think it should be a primer for any man who's getting involved with more than one woman.
Yes, I know, but the men you're
on the guys.
The men you're writing about here don't seem to have a clue. Don't seem to have a clue. No. Before we turn it to the audience for questions, and I hope and I'm confident there are a lot of people out there who've got stuff to ask you. I just wonder, Where are your classmates from that time in the 80s who you grew up with? Are they thriving in the world? Are they, did they take advantage of that moment of renaissance on the Northern Peninsula? And
most of my my cousins now are professional people. Like, they have a very diverse kind of workforce, wherein when we were kids, most people worked in the fishery. There were occasionally female members of our family were nurses or teachers, and so people work in different industries now, which I think is new for us.
mm-hmm.
Before, we did what was close, like what was something that we could see, and I suppose in a way I try to be this alternative version of an artist for my younger family members at the occasion that someone also has a creative inclination. So I have some family members, a lot of people that I went to high school with, ended up working in the oil sands in Alberta, which was a really common narrative for rural Newfoundland and Labrador kids of our age. Like, I graduated from university with my undergrad degree, and I owed the government a lot of money, and Mississauga was indeed calling every day. And so when you have that kind of student debt, which is just another collar, let's be serious, like, it's the same group of people that are exploited financially as were, like, during my great-grandfather's time. Like, my student debt is no different than being indebted to the merchant. Everybody just changed the name, so you can't track down people anymore. But I feel like that, and I think a lot of people felt that burden and fear of having financial instability, so they went to Alberta either to repay those loans or to make money for school, and then became a part of that community. But if you're asking if I went to high school with other people who became artists, then I would have to honestly say that I'm me, and I'm a little bit of my own person, even for the Great Northern Peninsula.
Well, congratulations again, and you are certainly you. I can't think of a voice that I've heard or read in my experience as a reader that's quite like yours, and I'm grateful to you for what was a great read, and for the future, I'm sure, of all that you're going to write out into this world.
I'm just getting started, but I also think that what is most promising about the book is that it is different, and it does sound different. So there are other young emerging writers in Newfoundland and Labrador that want to write in their own voice, and I hope the book encourages them to do so.
Yeah, hear, hear. So with that, I'd love to keep talking all day, but I know that we're limited. So when this becomes a live broadcast, the weekend of the festival, we'll be here again, and you'll be, no doubt, answering questions, and I'll be monitoring that on whatever web platform we've got going at the time. So thank you for this.
Thank you. I look forward to chatting with everyone.
Great.
Hi.
Hi, and we had a bit of a glitch at the top, but we're here live now with, I imagine, an attentive audience. And I'm located on a beautiful Saturday night, deep in the town. And Megan, I think you're somewhere else along the coast right now, enjoying the late day, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm around the bay.
Yeah, good. Well, we're both happy to be here. A little weird watching ourselves, isn't it, in that conversation? How'd you find that?
I texted my sisters and said I was watching a video of myself. It was unusual, but I got through it. I maybe muted some of it because I talk a lot.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Well, we've got some time now, and as I said when we recorded it, we're going to entertain questions from the listeners and the observers. A few have already come in, and I'll just remind everybody there's a Q&A icon at the bottom or the right of your screen, depending on what your platform is, and you just have to ask questions, and I'll field them. I'll pump them over to Megan. And Megan, one question that's come in pretty early is an interesting one. What's the best thing someone has ever said to you about this book?
I was at a music festival last May, so not this past May, but the May before, 2019, and the book had recently come out, and I was in the bathroom. It was actually a snotty-nosed res kids show, and I was waiting for my friend to come out of the bathroom. This is where, like, young women converse, right, in the doorway of the bathroom.
No kidding.
And a young woman came up to me and said that I'd written her favorite book and that she had read it 5 times. And I thought she had mistaken me for someone else because the book had only come out in February. So there must be some kind of confusion. How could she have read it 5 times in that amount of time? And I told her as such, like I was trying to be gentle, but I had also been drinking and I didn't want it to get more awkward. And she said, no, you're Megan Gail Coles, and I'm talking about small game hunting. And the book really resonated with me, and she thanked me for writing it. And that was, I suppose, the first time that someone came up to me and told me how important the book was to them. And it was in a environment that felt right for that. It was at like a rock show in downtown St. John's, on George Street, in fact. And so the idea that we could have these moments of connectivity in a climate or in an environment that not so long ago would have been considered like not even safe for us in some ways was nice and like kind of a little revelation. And that made me feel like all of the work and the kind of pain that goes into writing a novel like this was worthwhile.
Wonderful. Lovely. Another question. Lots of questions are coming in, so fasten your seatbelt there, girl. You have a prestigious mainland publisher for this. So this kind of question comes up often, I think, with Newfoundland writers. So the first, it's kind of 2-part. Do you plan to remain on the island or, in the province? And do you think you'll continue, if you can say anything about your future, continue to write only about Newfoundland, Labrador?
I don't foresee moving away from home. Some people don't realize, but I already moved away from home.
Yeah.
Moving to St. John's was moving away from home for me. Savage Cove is 12 hours from town. And so I'm already separated from the place where I was made. But it's still on the island, and the island is home for me. Like I'm in Bellevue right now, and this still feels like home for me. So I don't foresee any time when I'll live elsewhere for an extended period. I have gone to Montreal a number of times to study temporarily and then returned. But Newfoundland, not only is it where my friends and family are located, but it is like the place where I feel most myself. Mm-hmm. And I feel like kind of like I understand myself better in this context than elsewhere. Like I'm not searching to be someone else in some other place. I'm just trying to be me here and now and contribute to my community and possibly even make it easier for other people to be themselves in this place. And so I'm giving back.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of the opposite experience that somebody like Wayne Johnson almost kind of famously says. He lives in Ontario and Toronto and says all he can write about is Newfoundland only because he's away from it. So, I guess it different strokes. I guess he needs the physical detachment to some others do to be able to see the place more clearly for himself. But I get what you're saying, sure, about being yourself here.
It also depends on what Newfoundland you're writing about. I'm very preoccupied with writing about the culture that I live in, the culture that I'm immersed in. So I don't look back. Like, I look back just to learn from our heritage and our history. I don't set my novels or my fiction, in my short fiction, in the past. I have done that with theater, if that feels like the right time and place for that story. And so maybe that impacts whether or not the island is necessary. Like, I'm involved, I'm fully engaged in the culture, and that allows me to comment on it and like observe it in a way that's slightly different, say, than if I was like living in Montreal or living in Toronto. There's no right or wrong way to be an artist. You do what supports your work, and this is what supports my work. And honestly, I don't like to be away from my nan that much. Like, I'm not a homebody, but I likes to be out, you know, walking on the beach. Like, I am that person. Like, rubber boots and a raincoat, and I'm fine.
Well, especially on a day like today, right?
It's gorgeous. You don't need a raincoat.
Yeah, no kidding.
I do have like a number of books that I'm working on, and some of them will be coming out in the future with Nancy, and so I'm quite pleased with how things have gone in that respect. I'm a great fan of Sarah McLachlan, and
she just retired.
And even though she's retired, I plan on hounding her for the rest of our lives. She can't get rid of me that easily.
Well, tell us a little bit about what those books are. I mean, it's usually a question that comes up anyway from people. You know, what are you working on?
Well, I'm working on my PhD, but that's not really what anybody's interested in, because that's more.
Well, that's a kind of fiction too, but that's another story.
That's a whole nother thing entirely. But I'm working on a collection of poems right now that have been probably percolating for a very long time. Like, I started writing poetry at a very young age, but my capacity or my ability had never gotten anywhere near what I thought it should be, or my taste, and so I didn't really show anybody. And then I guess I feel like now is a good time for me to at least share some of them with the world. I mean, I think it's also, for me and for where I'm from, we didn't think of poetry as something that was necessarily like for us. And so part of publishing the poems is not just like for my own artistic progression or development, but also so that young rural kids in Newfoundland and Labrador who maybe think that this is something they might be good at can have more examples of rural Newfoundlanders and Labradorians publishing this kind of work. Like, I think verse is a part of our culture, but it's not something, because of the way it's been presented in the past as like a high art. And I say that, like, I believe no art is high. I believe all art is for everyone. But the way it has been perceived as inaccessible has made people think that poetry is not for them. And so my idea is to contribute to like the conversation where they know that anything is for them. There's nothing that they're excluded from. Did you study E.J. Pratt when you were growing up? I mean, I did an English literature degree at Memorial, so yeah. But I mean, earlier in school, I guess. We didn't really study a lot of poetry when I was in high school. Like, we studied the curriculum, and so Robert Frost comes up pretty often, and there's the Shakespeare and things like that. But as far as like Newfoundland poets or poetry, even of a Canadian heritage, we weren't exposed to a lot of that
in my younger years.
Yeah.
And so I think we can do a lot more to make that a more grounded part of our heritage, especially considering that we speak so poetically by nature. Like, I think I would like everyone to like just read a poem a day. I mean, that's anyway, we're gone off topic now.
Well, it's tied to music too, right? So music, there's so much poetry in the music produced here. Let me move on to, got a couple of juicy questions here.
Oh, juicy ones.
Well, you know, that's my personal take anyway. So somebody has said that you have just said, let's make men accountable. So the question is impossible, but anyway, here goes. How do you think we can make men accountable?
I think making the men that are close to ourselves in our own lives accountable for their actions and their words, and even like some of their preconceived notions about how people should behave in the world is a starting place. And so unfortunately for Dad, his daughters hold him accountable in his life for the things that he says and the things that he does. And while that's difficult and awkward, because you're talking about like having conversations that are not smooth, that are going to be uncomfortable, and in a way that like takes up a lot of time and emotional labor, those conversations then make a shift in the culture. Like, I think about Calv a lot, and there are a number of instances in small game hunting where Calvin could have gone another way, right? And one example is when Calvin, as a young man, approaches his sister and asks Amanda for advice about women and how he might satisfy a woman. And she too has no vocabulary, no way of negotiating this kind of conversation with her brother. And she's so fearful that she embarrasses him. And now he feels shut down. And so I think it's also having embarrassing conversations with each other and being honest, and maybe being more forward about the fact that we don't know the answers to every question that's posed. And in that like dialogue, maybe we can sort some things out. Like, it starts with holding your brothers accountable. It starts with holding your cousins accountable. Like, if you're holding your own family members accountable, then they're accounted for, right? And so you don't necessarily need to worry about them being out in the community, being disrespectful to women. We haven't had that in our culture. In fact, we've had a lot of examples, contemporary examples, where female family members uphold their male family members when they've been found guilty or less than respectful of women. And I would like to see that come to an end. I would like to see women, I would like us to stop internalizing the misogyny and taking it out on each other, because we know better than that. And it doesn't do anyone any good. Like this notion that it was like that for you, so it can be like that for the next generation, is a flawed notion. I don't want it to be like that. I'm in Bellevue with one of my dear friends and her 10-year-old daughter. I don't want it to be like that for her 10-year-old daughter. I want it to be better. I want it to be the obstacle that is put in the path of any wrongdoing. And so part of that is, unfortunately, maybe sometimes not being the most popular person at the party, and being okay with the idea that that word that comes when women try to hold men accountable will come, and it is not a reflection of you. Like, when the word comes, when the B word is flung down, that does not mean that you are that. That does not define you. Just because someone calls you something because you are trying to obtain a different kind of discourse doesn't mean that you are now a less than valuable person. So it's also like being strong. And I'm not saying that I've been strong all the time. It's like, people have called me names, and I'm sure they'll call me names again in the future. But if it means that like other vulnerable people will have it slightly easier and a little bit of a better path, then that's how these things will have to go. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's good. Lots of heavy lifting women have to do one way or the other. Here's a long sort of preamble to this question. It's kind of interesting. This person says, I haven't read the book yet, but I've just finished listening to the Canada Read debates. And I was bracing myself for your reading today that I wouldn't understand it because its complexity was criticized by some debaters. Your reading couldn't have been any more clear, especially with your use of metaphor. So what do you have to say about those Canada Reads debaters' criticisms? But you've already said you didn't listen to a lot of it, so.
I'll address it though.
Sure.
There's no question that I'm afraid of addressing.
Yes, girl, we like that about you.
What was challenging about it? Like a lot of people, the two male panelists, apparently referred to the novel as very challenging, but we're very unclear as to what aspect of the novel is challenging.
Yeah.
Is it the style of writing, which is reflective of a different dialect? Maybe, perhaps that's the case. We do watch lots of film and television that are written in dialects that are not familiar to us. Like everybody in the world over has watched Train Spotting, and don't tell me that Irving Welsh is not going after a dialect that is very particular to his background. Or is it that the dialect that we're talking about is a Newfoundland dialect, and there's all kinds of like regionalism and possibly like some obstacles that make people unable to engage with a Newfoundland dialect or a Newfoundland accent. Or is it that the sheer tenacity of me, the author, and the various protagonists in attempting to hold people accountable on every page, is that challenging? What aspect of this is challenging? Or is it the complexity of all of these things together that makes it challenging? Also, I would argue, and will probably argue indefinitely into the future, that a lot of things that are worth doing are challenging. Like why do we strive for easy things? What has doing the easiest, most undemanding thing ever contributed to us? Like, think about how this plays out in all kinds of other cultural aspects. Like, yeah, you could open a can and put that soup in a dipper or the microwave. You could eat that soup. That's easy, not challenging, not demanding, requires no effort. But it doesn't have any of the love or kindness or nutrition. It doesn't feed the body in the same way that soup made from actual like ingredients by someone you love. Do you know what I mean? Like the act of like persevering contributes more in lots of ways than doing the thing that requires no discomfort. And so I understand where they're coming from, possibly. I'm not justifying what they said. I'm rationalizing what they said. I'm saying this is how I think they came to that conclusion. I don't think it's a fair conclusion. I mean, how many people failed to read? If we all quit Sound and the Fury when we started reading Sound and the Fury, then no one would ever know the greatness of that piece of literature. Anyway.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's just exhausting persevering, you know that. But I certainly get what you're saying. Of course, things that are worthwhile are worth sometimes struggling for, often taking the labor of love to accomplish them with. So sure. It's hard to know. You're, second guessing what critics say, right? That can make you crazy, I suppose. But it's an interesting question. People are always interested in what is the writer thinking when she hears all this stuff said about her work. That was my first question to you in our conversation, because, we're curious about that.
The small game hunting is also designed like that. Part 1 is the hardest part.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And part 2 is slightly more accessible. And then by the time you get to part 3, you're so immersed in the novel that it moves fast for you.
Yeah.
And that is a number of different things that I'm trying to work through in this fiction. It's also like reflective of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's effective of trauma and accumulation, and things then accumulate faster after you've gotten to a certain point. Then you move through it quickly. But it's also like this idea that we can gain new skills. We can learn new language, new emotional language. My friend's children just came home. Anyway, I hope that's not loud. There's squid everywhere. The children are very excited. But this language you can acquire it and then not master it, but move through it. And so if you stick with something, it tends to get easier for you, and that's accomplishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That gives you a feeling of like achievement.
Mm-hmm. Answer this one. So somebody says she has not yet read the book, but has listened attentively to your reading and is listening now, I imagine. And the question is, I don't know where this person's coming from, but is your voice, or is the voice, uniquely from Newfoundland, or does the book reflect all of Canada?
I don't know. I think the voice is uniquely from Newfoundland. I think the sentence structure and the style and the point of view is very culturally grounded in Newfoundland, the island specifically, not necessarily Newfoundland and Labrador, which is the province that I am from proudly, but the rural part of the island specifically, which is my background. I don't know that any one book can ever reflect Canada, because Canada is a diverse accumulation of territories and peoples that are all having their own lived experience. And I don't even necessarily want a book to try to be all of those things, because then there's some absolutism that happens. Like we think that this is an absolute Canadian book, and that detracts or reduces the other books that are telling other stories. And I would like us to be like exploring each other's cultures and perspectives. And I think that ultimately that's what will make our country a stronger, more vibrant country. And so, no, it's not the most Canadian book, and it's not just Newfoundland, because it does speak to lots of people having marginalized experiences anywhere in the world, which I think that's what lots of writers are trying to do with their work. They write regional specific stories that have universal content or appeal universally. And so that's what I had hoped to accomplish. I suppose when the person who asked this question reads the book, they'll be able to tell me if I was successful or not.
Yes, read the book. I've got two questions from the same person, really. It's more a kind of comment and a question. So she says, do you think that religion has played a big part in the way older men treat women here? And then the kind of part B, she says, I teach in a Hutterite colony in Alberta, and I see religion as an excuse for putting women on a lower level. So again, that's a big question about religion, and maybe I'm mindful of time running out on our allocation here, but maybe you can speak to that.
Well, I can't speak to all religions in the same way that I can't speak to Canada, but if something is structured in a very, very strongly patriarchal way, then yes, that requires subservience from women. Like patriarchy requires women to be lesser than. There's a hierarchy of value, and women in this hierarchy of value are less than. So if that particular religion is founded on principles that have a hierarchy of value ladder, shall we say, and women are on the lower rungs of that value ladder, then that religion contributes to the oppression of women. And so it's not necessarily any one religious venture, but like the way the religion or the patriarchy is embedded into all of the narratives, and who tells the narratives, and what voices are accounted for, and what members of the religion are considered the hero members of the religion and celebrated as the leaders of the religion, and what members are not spoken for or spoken of poorly. And these are this is not just like found in religion, that can be a very oppressive tool when used in such a way, but also in all kinds of economic systems and institutions. Like anything that is really grounded in patriarchy will have the same result, unfortunately, for women.
Megan, I've got a couple more questions for you. The first one is about you, as you alluded to, or we talked about earlier. You're the second person to have won the BMO Winterset Award twice. And the other one, as we know, is Joan Clark, great writer. So the question is, how does that type of accolade affect your perception of yourself?
I don't really have much of a perception of myself. I guess I have a perception of myself. I don't, I'm just like a normal person living my very normal life. Like, this is something that I do as part of my job, but it really doesn't factor in. It's not the reason why I write. In fact, I think many people would agree that if I wanted to be popular, I would be writing very different kinds of books, because they're really problematic and they sometimes get me in lots of trouble. Not trouble exactly, but like I have a lot of people that want to talk to me about the things that I say, which is fine. And it is rewarding. Is that the right word, I wonder?
That's definitely the right word.
It makes me feel like I'm on the right path. Like it validates my instincts. Like, I feel very strongly that the instincts that I have regarding my art practice and my work and the progression of my work are sometimes like ambitious. And then when you are kind of acknowledged by your peer group, which is what Winterset is in lots of ways, because the jury is made up of other writers, and so great writers too. Usually, like, the winner of the last Winterset will sit on the next Winterset. So it's like this kind of support system or encouragement when you know that writers that you love and admire and respect think that the work that you're doing is valuable. And it gives you courage and strength to move on and do the next big thing. Like I'm talking about, I'm in the research process right now of a play that is going to look at Muskrat Falls. And so that's no small task, right? And I know that there are going to be a lot of people with a lot of opinions on this particular thing, but I think it is an important conversation that we need to have, and I think it belongs on a stage. I think it needs to be in a theater where something is living in a different way than in a book. And so in some small way, winning the Winterset gives me the confidence to then go after this next big thing that might even be harder than the last big thing. And that's helpful. And every writer likes to get 12 grand.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, that's good. I'd be shocked if you answered any differently, but it's nice to hear that. My last question for you comes from somebody who wants to know, what are you reading right now? What books are on your bedside table?
On my bedside table, I'm reading a lot of books for school, which no one is ever interested in. I read one recently, or I finished one yesterday by a person. The book was called The Other Side of Eden by a gentleman named Brody, and it was about varying worldviews. And so that was really interesting because I learned things about other cultures in Canada and across the world that I didn't know. And it helps you see how you fit in and how things can be conceptualized differently. And I think that's really important in everything, to be flexible and fluid and know that things can change if we decide to change them. Unfortunately, we've been in this weird power struggle where lots of people want things to remain exactly the same. And that's not really possible. And it's also not desirable. Like, why would we want to remain in the same kind of lifestyles and patterns if potentially we can be innovative and do something a little differently to make things better for each other? And so that's what I read. What else am I reading? I don't know. I got stacks and stacks of books all over the house. My partner is just like, he's always going around picking them up off coffee tables everywhere. I actually put them down with like on the spine, like so that they're like spread eagle on. Yeah, which people don't like, I know, but I have bookmarks. I think I'm going to return to it very like quickly.
Right. Yeah, it's a hopeful gesture, isn't it?
Yeah. So such good intentions.
Right on. Well, it's great to talk to you, and I know we have a large audience paying attention, and let's hope they buy your book. If they haven't already read it, as some have admitted, they are probably even more eager to do so now. It's been great. Winterset wishes you both congratulations and good fortune for the next projects, and I'm sure we'll see you back when we're all meeting at the beaches sometime in a beautiful summer post-COVID around the bay. So have a great rest of your evening, and again, thanks so much for your time and your generosity, and it's just great hearing your voice. Just terrific.
Thank you guys for hanging out on a Saturday evening on your computers. Imagine.
Well, you're a draw. And I'll just stand by saying that tomorrow we have our last session at 2:00 Newfoundland time. And I'll have two conversations back to back, one with new writer Eva Crocker, who I know, Megan, you know well, who has—
I've learned your book.
Yeah, her book's fantastic. Great first novel. And then a poet, Sharon Webb-Campbell. So we'll have two conversations with them, and we'll round out this lovely digital version of the Winterset Festival. Thanks, everybody, and have a great evening.